Good afternoon and welcome to the cybersecurity program. This is Lee McWhorter, instructor for the program. This is actually, I'm losing count of which number this is. We've done so many now. This is the 416 section start for the Security Foundations class. We have a new start this week and a lot of new starts as we continue to progress people and have new people start in the program. So, welcome. Um, these lectures and class videos, they supplement and support the courseware. We're going to go over the high levels of all the lessons and that you'll be working through over the course of the next few weeks, a couple weeks. And in each lecture, we'll take about half of the course material. Try to hit the highlights of the most important stuff, as well as point out any trickier areas or things like that. Especially as we get into some of that later, we'll do classes. We'll also do some demos and some hands-on, and show you how things need to be done. In this introduction class, we, as you know, from probably looking at the system already, and some of you I know have already started, which is great to see in the learning management system. But we have a total of 10 lessons that this is divided into. We're going to cover the first 5 today. And if you have any questions, of course, always remember to just drop me an email, lee.mcquarter@wasu, or I enjoy was our mentor, available through the Slack channel. If you haven't joined that on Slack yet, come on over to the cybersecurity channel and join. Trying to get more and more students in there and starting hopefully to build up, like the Full Stack Web has a lot of folks, and they're starting to build a history of questions and answers. We want to do some of that ourselves. We have a little bit of that now, so hopefully we'll see more of you there. So like I said, we're going to cover the first 5 lessons today. And we'll cover the next 5 next week on Wednesday when we have the second session. These sessions are posted online, so if you didn't make the class or don't make any of them, don't make it one of them at some point, they're always available. They are usually getting there a little later and later as there's more and more sessions. I'll be doing back-to-back lectures here for a while today, and then later this evening I'll post them all up onto the YouTube channels and post the links into the LMS. So let's get going then. This is the Introduction to Security Foundations. And the first thing we want to sort of talk about, of course, is what is information security? What are we attempting to do? And we go through in the lessons some information talking about what security stands for and et cetera. But in principle, what we're trying to do in Security Foundations or in information security is protect the digital assets and information of an organization. So that includes, of course, information in all of its different forms. You're going to find out about that throughout the program. And of course, learn all kinds of tools and techniques. But just keeping it very basic here, we're trying to protect that information. That could be customer lists, that could be proprietary source code, that could be scripts, sales plans, marketing plans, any kind of information at all. And of course, when we talk about the assets, we're not just talking about the information. We have to talk about all the stuff that goes around helping make that information possible. I mean, if this was the old days, security for our information would be hiring a guard to stand in front of the locked file cabinet. That would have been the pen and paper days. But now everything's digital and becoming more and more so. And so we have all these devices, all of these different things we have to do. And so over the course of this program, you will learn how to protect all the different assets, from helping to protect, sort of traditional things coming in through the outside internet connections, having different types of techniques to detect and monitor what's going on inside your network to make sure nothing slipped by your protection, your defenses, etc. And so, this first chapter basically sets out a bunch of key terms. And one of the real key ones that I always want to point out is the CIA triad. That is not the Central Intelligence Agency in this case. It's 3 really critical. You can look at lots of different ways. Sometimes I've seen it in books, and is that these are the promises we make in a sense in IT. These are the guarantees that IT, information security, InfoSec, is supposed to be making when it comes to those digital assets and to that information. And so these are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so confidentiality is pretty straightforward. We want to make sure that that data stays protected. Only the people who need and have right to know that information can see it. So if it's obviously not a big deal if it's the public website, then we'll obviously have that set up and open so everybody can see it. But then as we move into our own network, of course, things get more and more private. And of course, most organizations, like the government, the military is a great example, all the way to top secret, super secret, all the different classification levels. And we may have to deal with some of that inside of our organization. And so we need to maintain the confidentiality. We only want to make sure that the information within our organization is available to those who need to know it, have the rights and permissions to it. And so we need to maintain its confidentiality beyond that. And that one's pretty straightforward. Then integrity comes in that we have to maintain the state of that data. We have to be able to trust the data. Some of the sort of earliest hacks, in a sense, were changing stuff in a database. Just being able to get in there, and it still happens to this day. A lot of web attacks are actually, weirdly enough, database attacks, because they're attacking the backend database, injecting stuff into those databases through SQL injection, so that when those pages are then dynamically built and served out through the web server to a user, they'll include malware or do other things. And so here we are thinking we're protecting a website, but it's a database that ends up being vulnerable. And it's the data integrity. The content of those pages changed in a way that the person maintaining it wasn't aware of, or didn't monitor correctly, whatever the case may be. And so we have to maintain the integrity. I mean, obviously, we don't want the our sales records for our organization. If we're a profit company, we don't want all of that to change. We don't want somebody to be able to go in there and say that our clients don't owe us anything when they owe us millions of dollars, or to say that our clients owe us lots of money and we start sending these big embarrassing bills when they're current and paid up. We don't want any of the source code changed if we're a software company, or we don't want, all of that information needs to be maintained in a consistent state. I mean, data changes, but we need to track that. We need to understand that. So we need to maintain its integrity, so that we know that it's only being changed by processes that we're aware of. Obviously, somebody in accounting is working on the file and puts in a bill that's been paid, then that updates in the database. It's not that we're locking data to never change, but we want to maintain the integrity. We know that there's a process. We know that that person in accounting changed that data, and it's an appropriate change, not some outside or malicious or accidental type of change. And then the last one is availability. And funny enough, it's the one that many times I find that security professionals think the least about, strangely enough. Because they get so caught up in the attack and defend, and defending against attacks and firewalls and all the fun stuff admittedly we are going to do over the course of this, and learning how to do vulnerability scanning and doing all this kind of monitoring, and this is good stuff, and it's very important. If you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. But there's three parts here. We're maintaining confidentiality, we're protecting that integrity of that data, but we have to make it available. And so the whole point of that is like, we could lock down that sales data if we wanted to. For example, using sales data, we could lock it down hard as IT, super long passwords, triplicate forms, 3 sign-off managers before anybody gets into it. So we could absolutely guarantee the confidentiality and integrity. But of course, we then aren't taking into account availability. If the sales force is having to take, that much time, it's an extreme example, of course, but to prove the point, the sales force is having to, if somebody's having to take, all that time to do all those steps, to just get another number to call their next outgoing sales call, then obviously that data is not available to meet the needs of the organization. And that's actually, summing it all together, is a key piece of something that is hugely important, that once again, I find that as folks get buried into the small picture of attack and defend and playing and using the tools and monitoring and logging and all this great stuff, that they forget that their whole purpose in life is not security for security's sake. And even in IT in a broader sense, not just InfoSec, but our job is not just IT in a vacuum. It's not just to play with the toys and set up all the bells and whistles and the servers and everything. That's fun. That's probably what got us into this, because we're interested in it. It pays well and it's a good field and it's all that. But our job is to empower our organization. And so we have to keep that in mind, and that ties into that whole availability thing. We could lock it down tight, but we have to find a balance. And that's another big piece of these initial chapters and lessons, is there is a huge trade-off between security and convenience in almost every case. If you make something, like I said, that sells data, that sells prospect lists, more and more secure, then we have it's not very convenient. So our salespeople are taking 15 minutes to make one phone call because they're taking all this time to get the approval. And so, of course, we have to balance security versus convenience, because our overall goal is to empower the organization. And we have 3 promises, not just confidentiality and integrity, but also availability. We have to make the data available. So when people do have the rights to it, it's there, they can depend on it and then get their jobs done. So if that's the accountants, being able to make sure the numbers balance. If that's the salespeople, just being able to pull up the next sales call and go and make sales. If that's a donor list for a nonprofit, I use a lot in the word organization instead of just company or business or whatever, because we, InfoSec, InfoSecurity, it's government agencies, nonprofits, everybody, personal. So we use that phrase a lot. And so remember, we're empowering our organization to do what it's supposed to do. If that's raise money for a nonprofit, then we got to be once again providing that CIA triad of protections to that organization's IT infrastructure and assets. Um, and then we talk a little bit about, and we're going to talk a lot about them over the coming months and weeks of this program, but the growing challenges we face. One of the reasons this program has been started, and there's so many out there, and so much interest, and so much money being spent on security in different ways, and lots of unfilled jobs in this marketplace, because it is really, especially over the last number of years, it seems to just be escalating even more. And there's all kinds of challenges. One of it's just the sheer volume. I mean, when I started on the internet years ago, there weren't very many of us, and we dialed into the darn thing. And so the ability to hack, it was there and it happened, but it was also pretty minimal relative to today. Now that everything is online, and actually a whole new stream of things like what we refer to as the Internet of Things. If you haven't heard that phrase before, you'll hear it again. It basically means putting computers into everything, from the Nest thermostat to coffee machines to refrigerators, just on and on and on. I've read a couple fascinating articles over the weekend. Actually, one lady who had spent a whole month basically living in the smartest home she could make. She went out and bought everything smart she could get her hands onto. She's an investigative reporter, and basically lived that life. But they had actually set up a special router at her house to basically capture all of the data that was being sent by those devices. So it was fascinating how much data was being shared. The electronic toothbrush, everything was sharing the data of how often she brushed her teeth, how often she drank coffee, and on and on. And of course, everything, and all this data, all these devices, all these things on our phones, all our apps. And so these are things that not only are coming into our homes, but people are bringing these things into offices. And so as a related fascinating story I just read recently was a high-level overview of a hack that was a casino was attacked, and their list of high rollers was stolen from them. And the break-in point was a smart thermostat on an aquarium, a fish tank aquarium in their casino. That was the foothold. So here is an embedded device, this smart thermostat that you can control and monitor your fish. And I'm sure that was probably installed by somebody, managing the fish for them, and they wanted to keep the salinity and everything else just right. I'm not a fish expert, but nonetheless, that was the break-in point. So these are the challenges that we face as we move into this future, and why you're in this program, I'm assuming. So then we talk in the next, sorry, I got a barking dog in the background. We have in the next lesson, we start talking about security roles. We chose this for a couple reasons. One, we start off talking about some conceptual roles like a data owner or a custodian. And these are important because you'll see them when we start talking about some of the policies and procedures, and even in the coming next week when we talk about what are called frameworks, security frameworks, which are guidelines that help companies, organizations set up their own security policies. And so you see these conceptual roles. But then we spend some time just talking about some of the different entry, intermediate, advanced roles that are out there in this field. And it's only really a tip of the iceberg. There's variants and different levels, of course, and variations on the theme and name. But we give you some interesting kind of perspective of where you could potentially go after you get out of this program. You can head down one of the routes of being an analyst or a system security administrator or whatever your title might be initially. But then there's different paths you might go. If you really like, somebody phrased it that I saw on a video not too long back, but if you like breaking things, then maybe you're going to head down the road to becoming an advanced pen tester. Maybe you want to be management someday, so you'll add some other skills, maybe even an MBA someday, and go on and become the chief information security officer. And there's all different routes that within the security field, security researcher, independent consultant, on and on. And so we cover some of those, and then we have some exercises that have you do some thinking about where you might be interested to go. I won't spend, given we only, of course, have 45, 50 minutes, I easily tend to talk a lot. And if there's anybody occasionally in class asking questions, we'll run longer as well. But I usually take most of the time before I'm done, but I'm trying to make these a little bit more quicker as we go along. But so that's probably one of the ones that we'll spend the least amount of time on. It's pretty straightforward. You'll get a good little overview of some of the different roles, some of the potential career paths, and then you do a little research on that for your own interest. So if we move into lesson 3, we start talking about attacks and what are called, at least the phrase we use in cybersecurity, of threat actors. So attacks, of course, they're all different kinds of attacks. You're going to learn and actually get to do hands-on some of them yourself over the course of the program and later advanced class, intermediate and advanced classes. But nonetheless, I kind of break things into what I call standard attacks that have kind of been around as long as I have, and long as dial-up and internet and the internet, the early internet, just sort of, things that we see that happen every day, all day. People, usually not people anymore, but automated, machines that have been taken over, bots as we refer to them. Somebody's zombie network where they've taken over thousands of computers with malware, and they're using them to run their attacks. But they'll do standard things like brute force attacks, trying to log into, just using default, maybe a list of the worst passwords, not an uncommon attack vector. They'll try to get into certain types of web platforms, just try to attack WordPress site, try to attack these things that have been going on for a long time, as long as those things have been around, the net and the web in general. But then we also have some of these newer attacks, like breaking into a casino through a thermometer, a smart thermometer in an aquarium, and all kinds of things. I've used an example a couple different times. So if you go back and watch some of these videos, sometimes I use the same story, sometimes I don't, but I try to vary it up a little bit so that there's some value. And if you have questions, maybe watching one of the other copies of a previous class's lectures, they're all on the library and YouTube. But nonetheless, with all this smart stuff these days, I hadn't even thought about that, but somebody mentioned in an article I read, people bringing their new Alexa devices from Amazon into the office. Okay, and that's an issue, of course. So if they're now plugging in onto the Wi-Fi, they have a device. Maybe we'll see if that's ever going to become a security issue for somebody, but it's possible. But I've used the example of, what if something just breaks in the break room these days, a microwave, the refrigerator, or whatever, and somebody, gets some petty cash to get the authority, they go out, they buy one, they bring it back in. But almost, everything's now getting these chips, getting smart, getting embedded systems placed in them, basically becoming mini computers. Refrigerators with basically Android devices right there that can keep track of when your milk's going to go bad and all that. And so if somebody brings in some new device and, there's not an awareness of that, then there could be a huge risk that it could be brought in. Maybe somebody else sees it. Oh, we got the new microwave. It's just like the one I have at home. I have the app for that, so I'm going to get it on the Wi-Fi and set it up. And the next thing you know, you have this unpatched device that's running around that IT or security didn't even know it was necessarily on the network. And so our challenges are growing greatly. And there are all kinds of different attacks. There's a whole series of the stages of an attack, through sort of doing information gathering and recon and through that. And so those are things to be aware of, because it's important to know the steps of an attack, because you'll see signs of them. And so like if you understand that initially somebody might be probing your network, trying to take a look at certain things, then you know potentially what to look for. And you'll learn about this later, say in the logging and monitoring class, how you can see some of that in your logs. Oh, look, these people are scanning all of our ports. These people, you can even in many cases, of course, tell exactly what tool they're using. And in other cases, depending on what they're doing and how sophisticated of an attacker they are, then you may not be able to. Maybe they've done something custom. But a lot of the attack traffic is just kind of generated automatically. And so to talk about that, let's, we talk about steps. There's different types of attacks. The one more, and we'll spend some more time on this in a couple different ways actually throughout the program, but the sort of one specific area that has actually been around for as long is sort of hacking, and even predates hacking in the classic sense today. It goes all the way back to breaking phone systems, as it was called, and even predates the computer revolution. And hacking probably goes back in the sense, or social engineering, I should say, goes back even before that. Social engineering is the idea of manipulating people to get what you want. And so it can be a number of things. Today, the most common way that most people run into social engineering is through phishing or spear phishing, PHISH, phishing campaigns. Those emails you get that say they're from your bank, or say they're from Netflix, or say they're from whoever, but they're really trying to get you to go to some fake site in Russia or wherever it may be and claim your information. So social engineering, though, can also be some of my favorites are the examples of there was a bank heist in the Midwest of the country, United States, not the Mideast, Midwest, up in the Midwest around the Great Lakes, that was basically facilitated. It was a digital heist. They didn't come in with guns and masks and try to get out in 2 minutes before the cops get there. Somebody walked in with a clipboard and a computer on his bag and a badge and said, "I'm here to fix somebody's computer," and he didn't have a name. He didn't know, but he figured that the odds were that somebody's computer was broken. And that little scam worked, because then the receptionist is like, "Oh yeah, Susie's computer in the back," and they just take this person straight back. And the funny part to me was this criminal hacker actually fixed Susie's computer, but while there, also installed a Wi-Fi access point, tapped into their network, and then from a hotel nearby, they cracked in later and transferred some money. So that was a classic social engineering. And so the idea of using social engineering is another type of attack. So we have standard attacks, those just brute force attacks, things that have been going on, trying to log in, trying to look for weak spots. And then we have these newer, kind of more creative attacks. We can talk about more of them. There's some material about how now we're even seeing to reaching into the physical world. We're making things happen in the physical world. There's been a number of references. The lesson references how the Iranian centrifuges were damaged by an attack. There has been recent, finally coming out just this year, about an attack in the Middle East. Some think it's a response to the damage to the centrifuge, and that the Iranians learned from this. I don't know who's responsible for any of that. That's speculation. No one's taking credit. But regardless of who, in the case of whether it was Americans, Israelis, or third parties, somebody got a virus into those centrifuges and damaged them. And that same sort of technique was used against a refinery. And the analysts now are saying that if it wasn't for a mistake in the code that the attackers wrote themselves, if they hadn't made one bug in their own code, they could have made that plant blow up. And then we have seen just the other day, the head of the basically equivalent in England of the CIA or NSA, National Security Agency, saying that they had, talking in a conference about the offensive cybersecurity actions that UK had taken against IS to discredit and to degrade their capabilities online and shut down their sites. But he even mentioned physically damaging networks and servers. So we're moving into a world, and this is the world you're joining this in, that it's not just stealing data anymore. It's not just, taking over a network, defacing your website with some, banner message to support some political cause. All of those things are still there, but we're looking into a world where literally physical damage can begin to happen, where you can drive a device, if you can break into it, so that it literally is running too hot, overheat, but it's still reporting back to the sensors everything's fine. And these control systems that are out there are in just tens of thousands of manufacturing and chemical and petroleum and other types of facilities and plants around the world. And if they are open game now, if anybody outside of, say, the nation state actors starts to use this for terror or for exploitation money, criminal, then we're going to see even more of this. So there's something to be aware of, and we'll keep you appraised as we go forward. But these are some of the types of attacks. So we have standard attacks, we have all these new attacks, and then we have a subcategory that's kind of not old and new, but that is the social engineering. Now, the threat actors, we'll talk more about them later in another part of the class in a little bit more detail. But at the highest level, we talk threat actors are the people who carry out a potential threat. They take advantage of a vulnerability. And so the first thing that comes to mind is hackers, but I prefer to think of them, hackers can be good or bad. Initially, the word was a good term, then it became negative, and now because of white hat, black hat, we've kind of gotten back to where hackers kind of neutral. And that a hacker could be a good hacker, a social, research scientist, a white hat hacker that's reporting these weaknesses and helping getting them fixed, or of course can be the black hat. But instead of hackers, we usually use phrases like nation state actors. So of course we know that Britain, America, US, Russia, Israel, Iran, everybody, just about maybe every country on the planet has their own cybersecurity people. And if not directly, many of them have both, not only direct staff, trained professionals with lots of money, but they may have sort of quasi-independent third-party groups that are still financed and resourced. Nation-state actors can lead to being very persistent. They can stay and break in and or keep attempting for a long, long time because their goals are focused. We're trying to steal this information. We're trying to get into this network or this power grid, whatever the case is. They're usually very resourced and very well trained, so they're very risky. If you're up against them. Thankfully, they're not the average IT person's sphere, and if you work in defense contractor, you work in certain fields, then yes, and if you work in high-end tech areas, certain places, you may be under their thing. But the one that we're most commonly kind of that everybody has to be prepared for is just a notch below these days. Is what drives most criminal activity and hacking online is criminal money. whether it's trying to sell another fake ad or get another account compromised, or steal some more information on the dark web. Money is driving all of the vast majority of attacks. And since money, if there's money in it, then of course, obviously these resources, these hackers are pretty good. These criminal hackers, some of them are phenomenal, actually. I ran into a group through a private client that had not been my security client until, sadly for them, until the event happened, but they had a very specifically spear phishing targeted campaign where literally a nonprofit that one of the key people at the company, the nonprofit was attacked because it was weaker security. Then they used that email address that they had just compromised to send a request in to the accounting person at the organization, the target, and they knew that person worked at that nonprofit on the side or helped run it, and so it wasn't surprised to get an email from them. So they opened the attachment. Nothing happened, which should have been its own first warning sign because it was supposed to be a picture or a PDF or something, but nothing opened. And they just thought, oh, I'll ask him about it later, and moved on. But that was the Trojan running, and those people then, of course, were able to get in through that. And these, like I said, these were sophisticated criminal attackers when we traced it all down. We did a lot of forensic analysis and even reversed the code. And there's some Eastern European group. It's about as far as we could trace it. And apparently they're very good at what they do. They literally kill themselves. Their code dies within like 36 hours. So you might have had their Trojan on your computer anytime in the last years. They've been around for a while, apparently. And if you, once 36 hours went by, if that Trojan didn't see what it was looking for, which was commercial bank kind of logins, it was not even personal. They didn't care about you. They're looking for businesses. And if they didn't see the right type of logins to the right type of stuff, then they just deleted themselves because they didn't want the antivirus software out there to get kind of a feel for them. So they actually delete and are always issuing new versions. And so these are criminal threat actors that are really the biggest threat for the average enterprise. The nation states are a bigger threat, but only targeted generally at more specific areas. And then the common threat that everybody has is sort of the lower tiers as you head down in less sophistication. We've seen a whole bunch of what's called hacktivism, Anonymous, and other groups like that that attack for one side or the other, or one political cause or another, or one reason of the week or the other, and then all the way down to what we call just the script kiddies, which are the amateurs, the beginners. I joke that we get a new crop of them every Christmas as kids get their first computers, or even these days their first smartphones, and a certain percentage, the first thing they do is go off to the hacking sites and they start downloading things and they start trying this stuff. And of course, a lot of the stuff actually that I sort of put them together, but a lot of the just scripted attacks, they may be being conducted by a somewhat higher organization or a higher level of attacker than, but then since they're still just automated kind of low-hanging fruit attacks, I still kind of consider them down. I mean, it is so easy to do these days. Any of us could literally, within minutes, I could be attacking any IP you wanted to give me. Of course, it's illegal, and I have fixed IP since I work from home and have business and all this stuff, so I would be traceable. But of course, maybe I could hide that like the hackers do, right? So, I mean, anybody can do this stuff. And so it's so easy just to download one of these attack tools. And actually, one of the things that I've read that's one of the most common entry points is today's games. For a while there, apparently, now there's course, new games that are popular, including Fortnite now, but Minecraft was all the rage a few years ago, and everybody had a lot of kids had their own Minecraft servers, and a lot of kids would get mad at their friends, or they're maybe not their friends, because they wouldn't let them on their server. And so here were denial of service attacks being conducted against somebody's Minecraft server. So the skills were learned, at the very early age, and then hopefully some of those will go on. Many of them will go on to be good folks or are in the field, but of course many of them go on to be the bad actors. So it's important to understand the different types. We'll talk a little bit more about them next week as well. I'm just looking at my time. We're doing pretty good here. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Alrighty. So, like I said, it's important to understand we use those phrases a lot, the threat actors, and you'll see those kind of reference in those names and journals and articles out there. There's estimates that the script kiddie is about 60 or more percent. It's the largest amount of just sheer traffic. It's just all this kind of automatic, amateuristic, fairly low end. But it also is one of those things that I've seen estimates that if you put an unprotected computer up on the internet, that in a matter of I've seen them as low as minutes. I find that a little hard to believe in my own practical experience. But I would say to a few hours tops. So from a few minutes to a few hours, if you put an unprotected machine onto the internet these days, it will be compromised in that period, in a few hours, if not a few minutes. And it's because there are constantly machines out there that have already been compromised that are constantly just scanning the net, looking for more machines to compromise, these zombie or botnets, as we call them. And organizations, whether it be a kid that's trying to denial of service his friend's Minecraft server and he's kind of amateurs about it, to the most sophisticated nation state players, are all building these things, because then they give you a distributed network that you can conduct other attacks and approach from. And of course, then they don't trace back to your home because you're using everybody. And plus you're using all their resources for free, not your electricity, not your processing power. You're just command and control, and you let these other machines do their thing. And almost all of them, I have analyzed many of them. It blows me away, but it's not uncommon that I saw a web exploit on Linux web servers that was exploiting PHP-driven websites, and analyzed it a number of years ago. But it took advantage of an exploit if the server was not patched to the right level, and it injected itself, and literally, it got system level access to inject its own process. And this process basically did a handful of things. Once it got into your system, it replicated itself. That's what viruses do, right? So it made a copy of itself, and that copy began running in the memory of that newly infected machine. And it did really two things. It made some entries into what's called the cron, but just some entries into the sort of event log. Every so often, we want to run these things, this automatic task manager under, Windows side of things, but where you can set up a task to run every day or whatever. So it set up a couple rules so that it would remind itself, or have the system call it to have it check into a control server. And this was a brand new instance years ago, and so the control server wasn't doing anything yet. It was letting the thing spread, and then they were going to get enough of them out there, and at some point, then they would have passed additional instructions up based on that every day that the infection was checking in. It also, though, immediately fired off an exploit process where it basically literally generated random numbers between 0 and 255 for the IP range, picked a random IP range, literally random, and just started scanning and attacking that range. And so that was how, and that's not an uncommon technique. So they will just spread. Of course, if they're more targeted, then maybe the IP ranges that they're interested in will be written in. Or if it's somebody driving it through one of the programs like a script kiddie, then they may have put in the IPs. They know their friends in the neighborhood, so they got to be on the same network or something like. But generally speaking, many of these things, they just spread by themselves. And so it's important to understand the different actors, because you can kind of tell the difference. Well, in some ways, the simplest, the most amateurist, if you follow the most bare basics we're going to teach you, you won't have to worry about them really. You don't ever use default passwords. You make sure you set passwords, set things up, just the basic stuff. And they will not happen to you, because they're looking for the 10,000 worst passwords. They're looking for the unpatched system. They're looking for the default password. They're looking, and they of course find them, sadly. But you, after this program, will not be the one they find. And so while you'll be able to see them in your logs, you'll be able to see that they're coming by. They're coming by all the time. I could look over to one of the servers that I run, and I guarantee you it's happening right now on my servers. And it's happening in the cloud, these virtual servers up in the cloud we'll talk more about later as well. So these kind of attacks are going on constantly. So it's important to know, because there's kind of different levels. If you see certain types of traffic and or certain amounts of traffic, you see certain things will give you hints to who you're up against. The script kiddies, like I said, and the amateur kind of automatic attack stuff, if you take all that out of the equation by doing the basics, then you can avoid most of that, if not all of it. And then you really get to focus on, okay, what if one of the criminal or nation or other type has decided to target us? And we're going to really look out for them. And we can tell, they're going to take additional steps. They're going to potentially do things that aren't just automatically the same out of the box that everybody else is doing. And then we'll know that we have other things to be aware of. And as you learn more about this and run into more case studies and experiments and see some of it in work, it'll make more sense. So that's the threat actors and threat types. So we got a couple other sections to cover in our remaining minutes, which we're still doing good on. Lesson 4 is on information security. So we talked about that this is, in information security, we're trying to protect the digital assets of an organization. And so what do? There's a really big keyword that you're going to see again and again, and lots of the things I'm going to say throughout lots of these videos again and again, because that's just the way they are in our field. But you're going to see the word controls. Anytime that we do anything in IT security that we're putting some kind of control in place to protect the data and the assets of the organization, then we're implementing a control. And there are all different kinds of controls. We can have things like, like a technical control, for example, like when you try to log into something and you say fail 3 times, it locks that out. That's a technical control. It's a preventative type control. We can have procedural controls. Most people, when you go to work at a place, they're going to make you sign an acceptable use policy, an AUP, which defines what you can and cannot do on their network with their provided equipment and computers, and whether you can go to Facebook on your lunch break or on a break, or whether Facebook's blocked, or every company's got their own rules depending on their level of security and how they have their networks and everything designed. Some people let some of that be open to their employees. Other people are like, nope, you stick to work sites, lock things down, and it all varies based on their own decisions and their own, as you're going to see. But we have all kinds of controls. There are regulatory controls. In certain industries, you're required to do certain things, and usually they'll be overlapped with the policies that we write that enforce those regulations in our company. We have just a number of different controls. Obviously, we can have something like an intrusion detection system, which we'll talk much more about later, but the type of system that we can place on our network or place on a particular important critical piece of infrastructure, like an important server, and have it monitoring. And if it's just in a detection type mode, then we have a detective type control. We see some kind of strange traffic, or we see something that hits some kind of a rule that looks like a known attack, or it looks similar to something, or it's just out of the norm, or maybe it's against this. We know our baseline traffic is this, but all of a sudden we're here. Then we can have these alerts go off, and all of these types of things, they all come together under the umbrella of information security, so that we can protect the data. There's a graphic in the lesson that shows the data, the servers and the data at the very core of this like onion. And each layer is these layers that we put on top of it to protect it. And so, of course, we have some products we use like security firewalls and intrusion detection systems, software and hardware, and all this stuff. And then, of course, we have people. We have the people that use that stuff, and so we need these policies to help the people know how to use the products. And so that's why when you go to work, you're told what you can do, usually with an acceptable use policy. You may have to sign other documents. Companies usually have password policies and other types of security policies in place for the organization and for the different employees and levels, and there may be levels of that. Obviously levels of access rights and control throughout. So an organization has to do a whole series of things to ultimately build its complete security policy. But these are the things we use. We use products in the way of software and hardware, devices, technology. We use people, which are the users. We need to train them so that they're part of our team. But we have our IT people, we have our security people, and we have all of these procedures and policies that we put in place that sort of ties it all together. And these are layers that we've put, to build and to help protect that core, corporate asset, the corporate data, the information that we're after. There is a really important concept that is discussed in this lesson 4 on this, which is called the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. And one of the things that happens in an IT period, IT planning, network planning, security planning, all kinds of, is that especially how complex it is. Like I said, years and years ago, when it was all paper, it would have been in a file folder somewhere in a locked file cabinet. Today, maybe in the earliest days of computing, when it was only the accounting department that even had access to the computer to run the bills or something, and no one else had it. And so, but as we've now expanded so that everybody's got computers on their desk, everybody's got devices, there's all this stuff around, there's all this infrastructure, all these things, and you're trying to figure out, how do I defend all this? And we'll think we don't have to start from scratch, and we'll talk about that more next week. But even here we don't. This is a model of how to break up sort of a typical organization's infrastructure, IT infrastructure, into these 7 areas or domains. So there's the user domain, the workstation domain, the LAN domain, the WAN domain, the remote domain, on, the server domain. 7 domains, but they're logical areas that make sense, and that they're going to have similarities of, say, equipment and needs and protections and other stuff. And so it allows us to sort of use it as a way to break up our network and think about, okay, we got the user domain. That's all of our users. That's all of our people. Well, what do we need? Well, we need some training probably. We're probably going to need some rules, some policies and procedures. We're going to need, and so we can just decide what kinds of things we're going to do there. So then in the workstation domain, these are the systems. And then back a few years ago, even that was pretty much a computer, but today that's changing rapidly. It's not just a computer. It could be a tablet, rugged device, all kinds of different things. But the workstation domain is the client. Those users, that's the systems they use, whether that's a tablet, that's a point of sale system, whether that's a computer at their desk with 2 monitors or just a little laptop they carry around. It doesn't matter. So we have to decide what kinds of systems are we going to use? What kind of systems do we need to provide? Once again, remember, we're empowering the organization to do its job. So we're not just making these systems for security, we're making them to empower the organization, but we're taking security into it. And so all of these client systems, even though they may be different, they do, once again, as a domain or an area, they share things in common. Like they need to be protected themselves. What kind of antivirus are we going to use? What kind of firewalls? We should have local firewalls. Even if you have a big one out there, you need them on the local machines. What kind of policies and procedures are going to be in place? What kind of patch management, on and on. And then we can work our way through all of the areas of our network, and our entire infrastructure, I should say, and different areas of our network, including the LAN, the local area network, and the wide area network, our connection to the outside world, our remote accesses, and then we can start to have an idea. And the other thing is you'll see the 7 domains referenced a lot out there. So it's an important concept to get in mind. There may be references in articles that talk about when you're working on that, securing the LAN domain. I mean, it's just a pretty common model, and we want you to understand it. And it's a good conceptual model to think about. And you'll see it used when we talk next week about the frameworks as we really start trying to build an organization's security policies. So, so that is lesson 4. So that leads us, we're doing good here, to hit lesson 5, which is our last one for this week. And then we'll talk about the last 5, 6 through 10 next week in that lecture. Lesson 5 is basically, now that we've sort of set some basics, we've defined a few terms, we talked a little bit about security roles and possible future careers. We talked about what kind of, once again, introduced the high level of attacks and the attack actors. And then we talked a little bit about the layers of how we do use people, products, and policies to protect the corporate data and corporate information or organizational information. So then when we start to introduce, we have both this lesson and the first we'll start with next week are on defense concepts. And probably the most important one about that you need to be aware of is the concept of layered defenses, or defense in depth, it may be called. This is a term that generally has come historically from the military, and you can use all different kinds of examples, but probably the best one that I use probably all the time, I'll admit, in these different lectures, but is the old castle. I think everybody can picture a castle from some movie, or from a picture from the European or history book or whatever. And if you think about a castle, it is a perfect example of defense in depth or layered security. You will first, if you really, in almost every case of, especially any castle that was more than just show, if it was really meant to be a defendable kind of place, then you're going to see that usually the first thing you're going to see is actually as you start to approach the castle, is that you can see the castle from a long way away, and they can see you from a long way away. This may be because they're built up on top of a hill and thus have that height advantage to look down, or even if it's sitting on the flattest land in the area wherever it happens to be built, it's very likely that a large circle around it will have been just completely cleared so that we can see in a distance. We have that ability to see way out there who's coming at us and get prepared for that. Then we may have that moat around the castle, and it may be filled with crocodiles or dragons or piranha or sludge, burnable oil, whatever. And we have a drawbridge over that. We have a gates, portcullis. We have these big, beautiful walls with our turrets and little slits where people can shoot arrows out through them at the people coming. We can throw stuff over at them. And we have that big open area. We can see an attack. We have our first lines of defense and the bridge and the moat, and then we have our castle walls and our portcullises. Usually they are built in layers themselves so that there are multiple layers inside. Even if the attackers break through that first stage or that first wall, there's an inner citadel with another layer of walls and a way to close off those last doors for that last line of defense. And in a classic military sense, that is a perfect analogy of defense in depth or layered security. Now, so we want to take that mindset to how we protect information in the corporate world. And so it's one of the most important concepts you'll learn, and you'll learn that, especially as we layer some more into it as we go on in the future, that there are some additional concepts we can use, but it's going to be the core concept that you're using both strategically, both when you look at your entire organization, you want to better have defenses in depth. But even when you look at each of those areas, you can apply that kind of defense in depth logic. And so that by combining basically all the things, even in this first day, now you'll learn how to do it over time, but we combine the procedures, the products, the people, we put all this together, we put it together in different layers and different formats, and we build that same kind of protection for our corporate assets. So in our case, it might involve our way of having visibility. We can't, in a sense, see, from the top of the hill, but we want to have visibility. So our IT people and our security people better be up on things. You're in this program to learn. You'll be learning for the rest of your life now in this field, because the attacks change all the time. So you're going to need to be able to be up on it. You're going to need to be able to know what to look for, right? It was easy for those guys standing on the wall of a castle. They see a big army, people pushing catapults and stuff heading across that field. They knew they were under attack. In our case, what kind of traffic is coming in? Is it standard traffic? Is it what we're used to? Is it something new? Is it something? So we're going to have to keep our eyes open, just like they do. We're going to have to put up our moat, if you will. And the most common piece of equipment you'll learn a lot about over this program is the firewall. So there'll be an exterior, at least firewall. Many organizations and will have multiple firewalls, different layers of depth. Once again, even in that concept alone. We'll add other things to that. We'll add the ability to log and monitor centralized data so that we can maintain things. And that's an active part of your job. I always say, if you're not looking at your logs, you're not doing your job. And I say that in IT, let alone security, because if you're not, you're just that they're there for a reason. They're there to tell you something's going on. Those warnings will tell you your hard drive is about to fail. All those failed login attempts tells you you're under attack. And so these kind of things we have to monitor. And then we, of course, will look at other types of software, like antivirus software and other types of equipment that we may use. We may use some of the things like I mentioned, intrusion detection. We may use these scattered about, just like we have multiple firewalls in different segments of the LAN and all this. We want to protect. We may have monitoring equipment in each of those segments, each looking for certain things. If you have a website out on the public side, it's important these days. Most people do, but we probably want to protect it. So we would potentially monitor it for certain types of things, make sure there aren't specific web attacks. But then, of course, in our interior network, I remember being asked years ago in a class by some student, why do I need the firewalls and all this stuff inside if we have the firewall? And I'm like, well, what if they get in? And if they get in, then, of course, if you don't have those layers and defenses, it's just like if somebody could tunnel into that moat and under that first wall and they pop up, then the whole thing falls apart because there's no more layers. So we need to make sure we have multiple layers. So actually, to keep a virus that somehow gets inside, past your firewall, past your spam filter, past everything, maybe somebody brings it in on a USB stick, don't it? And it gets in on a computer, and then it spreads like wildfire because you have no internal layers. So we need those layers. And so we're going to learn about all these different things. We're going to have, obviously, hardware firewalls. If supported, we're going to want firewalls on local machines as well, servers and workstations. We're going to want other types of monitoring and logging type of equipment and types of software being run. And we'll learn all about that as we go forward. But that's all toward building that defense in depth so that there is not one, ideally the hacker can't get past. They get past one thing, then just like they get past the moat, there's still the wall slowing them down. Okay, there's still the intrusion. Now we still see that they're, they somehow compromised our intrusion detection. And now they've compromised the server. But because we're also archiving, in real time, that log data off, even though they're deleting the data over here trying to cover their trails, we still have a copy over here in our logging system. and we can see what's going on, and we can, analyze what happened and understand that breach, and of course, hopefully close it and stop it from ever happening again. So we want that defense in depth, just like the defenders of that castle wanted to buy as much time to survive that battle. We want to buy as much time as we can. We want to put as many things within reason in the way of our adversary to slow them down as they head toward attacking us. Now, there are a number of related concepts of defense in depth that are very important to at least understand, and they vary a little bit depending on the size of your organization, but the concept should be, tried to be utilized as best as possible. And these are what we call either separation of duties as one, or rotation of duties. And the idea is that it's its own layer in a sense. If, let's say we've got a big enough organization to really implement this. So we work for a fairly big organization. We have dozens of people that work on our IT, so many people that work on our security team. And if we just rock on with the same people doing the same thing all the time, then of course, or everybody has all the permissions, I guess either way you look at it, there could be a problem. So the idea is that it's not uncommon if a small company starts up, their IT person is God. They have full power, root to every machine on the system. But as an organization grows, they may add a second person, and just for ease, that person says, here's the admin password, and now we have 2 gods, 2 full admins, and then 3. And of course, if you just keep down that road, at some point you got 30 people that every one of those people can do anything on your network. And that's not separation of duties. So we want to, over time, especially as we build an organization up, we want to have somebody, okay, Bill, you're going to manage the mail server. So yeah, you have administrative rights to the mail server, but you don't to the login server, you don't to the web server, you don't to the database server. Other people manage those, and we separate those duties. And then if we really can do it, and we've got, even if you're a 3-person team, you can separate, you do the LAN, I'll do the WAN, whoever, and divide things up. But maybe it's not as easy, but as you to rotate. But as you get a little bigger, then it becomes, okay, after 6 months, whatever, Bill, you've been a great mail server, but we're going to have Sally come in and take over the mail server now. And you're going to go over and learn this one. Now, there's some disruption, but also opportunity here if you really do this right, because you're cross-training people, so you're not dependent. But from a security point of view, you also means that Bill can't leave at least theoretically, can't leave a back door on that mail server, because he's not going to be running it for 6 months. If Sally will find it when she takes over later, and 6 months later somebody else, or however your rotation is. So these are important concepts. The defense in depth, layered security, and the related separation of duties and rotation of duties where possible. And these are some of your basically first line kind of security concepts. Next week, we'll start talking about a few additional ones to layer into that. And we will then talk about how we take all this that we learned in these first few lessons and actually start to, how are we going to take what we just learned? Wow, we got to protect all 7 domains with all 3 promises. Confidentiality and availability. We got to protect against all these different hacks and attack types. So we'll help put together the framework next week. We look at some of the security frameworks of how we're going to build an organizational security policy and an entire plan, all the way down, overall from the big picture down to the individual policies. Now, the last thing I'm going to wrap up here in the last few minutes, and I've taken almost all of it again, but is just on why here. We've learned all this. There's all these attacks going on. There's all this stuff happening. I've even told you if you do the basic stuff, you can throw out a big chunk of them. So, it's like, and then I'll be honest, certain companies have higher chances. Depends on who you work for and what kind of data your company has, and whether you're really targeted. I mean, anybody, you would be surprised. That example I told you of the spear phishing campaign where they stole money, that was just from a construction company. Boring as you can get. They got 20 grand from them. So, anybody can be attacked by criminals. So we have to be aware, but, why do we do all this? I mean, and really it kind of comes down to the same reasons most of them are doing it. They're doing it for money, and we're doing it for money. We're doing it to avoid money. There's an estimate, I don't remember the number now, but it was a lot of money that it cost Sony when that PlayStation hack and those other hacks for them happened years ago. I have not heard the estimates of what the Equifax hack is going to cost them, but I assume huge ton of money. And that's because they've had to, we lose, if you have one of these events happen and you have a failure of your system, and thus your data is down, your customers, aren't able to do something. You lose reputation, you may lose direct customers, you may lose direct sales that day, I'm sure there were a few people that bought their kids an Xbox or a Wii or whatever when that PlayStation hack was happening. They didn't buy a PlayStation that year, even though Sony had fixed everything by then. It cost them some sales. It cost them money. They had to give away a bunch of free games and identity protection, and of course they had to spend a lot of money. The security people ran through everything and checked and double checked everything, and they probably reset boxes, restored boxes, did all these servers, and did all these different things. And so we want to avoid the consequences of these events. And another area beyond just pure money, even though money is still related in this concept too, is it's becoming more and more important, and it's going to become even more so in a few days, like not too very long, when the new European general protection data standards going into place for privacy. California has some pretty tough laws. Certain states have certain laws. There are requirements to disclose if breaches happen and to do certain things if the personal information is breached. And so these are the reasons why we do this. We're trying to avoid those kind of impacts on our organization. And as I said at the very beginning too, the reality is we don't do it just for doing it. We do it to empower the organization we work for. So if we fail, the organization could potentially fail. If our company's a website selling money online and our website goes down and goes down for a long time, which might not even be more than hours or days, we could be out of business. And so, we have to analyze this, and we'll learn more about the details of how to do it and how to come up with, putting together an organization's plan, and as well as all the fun skills and techniques over the coming classes. But that's what I have for you today. Like I said, later this evening, we'll get this posted and updated into LMS, and I hope to see you next week for that lecture. And if not, it'll be available online as well, too. If you have any questions, let us know. Thanks. Bye.